All right, friends, you should all have your papers in front of you. You will need that and a writing utensil as we go through our next part of our exercise. I want to remind you of our goal today. Our goal today is to just listen to this podcast. We've been talking about travel all week. We've been focusing on certain travel vocabulary words. And as I read through this podcast with you, I don't want you to write anything on that paper yet. I just want you to listen. I want you to really take a moment and absorb what I'm saying. It's really important to just kind of hear the words, to just mingle them in our brains. Remember when I tell you when I went to Panama and I had to learn Spanish and I only speak English? Well, a lot of times all I did was listen, friends. I didn't talk. And I listened. And just listening really helped me kind of grow my vocabulary. But more than that, it really helped me get familiar with the cadence of how people are speaking. So that's my goal for us today. The whole goal of our exercise today is to be familiar with how we're speaking and the cadence of what's being said. Now, we know that this podcast is about Bali. We've been talking about Bali earlier in our warm-up activity. So let's do a little predicting. You know, my favorite skill, my favorite thing to do when we're reading is predict. We're going to just predict. We know the title is Bali. Don't look at your paper. Julio, don't look at your paper. Turn it over. Good job, Julio. All right. What do you think this podcast is going to be about? We know the topic's Bali. We know it's about travel. Yeah, Esmeralda. Correct. This podcast could be about a vacation to Bali. Good, nice. Julio? Right. It could talk about food. Definitely. Juan? Yeah, it could talk about someone's experience on their trip to Bali. Good, I like that. That's sort of like a summary. Remember yesterday we wrote summaries from our itinerary? So yeah, this travel podcast could sort of be a summary of their trip. Good work, my friends. All right, last one, Maria. Yeah, it could be fiction too. You know, not a real story, as you said. Fiction, true. Very good. Okay, now we have a general idea, but we're just guessing, right? We don't know what this podcast is about. So we are just going to listen, my friends. We're just going to hear Teacher Tammy read this podcast. We're not going to write anything down, okay? Just listen. Welcome to our travel podcast. Today we are going to talk about Bali, a beautiful island in Indonesia. Many tourists visit Bali because it has amazing beaches, interesting culture, and friendly people. The capital city is Denpasar. It is a busy city with markets and temples. One famous landmark is Tahina Lot Temple. This temple is on a rock in a sea, and many tourists go there to see the sunset. Bali has delicious food. A popular dish is nasi goreng. Another famous food is babi gung. Many dishes have rice, fresh vegetables, and tasty spices. Bali has many exciting activities. Tourists love sightseeing at rice terraces, visiting temples, and hiking Mount Batur. The beaches are also great for swimming and surfing. Katu Beach, Nusa Dua are all popular places by the sea. Many visitors stay in hotels and resorts. They enjoy the beautiful views and the warm weather. In the markets, tourists can buy souvenirs. A journey to Bali is a great experience. We just listened. Let's think back to our predictions. Juan had said that it could be about a trip, someone's trip. Is this true? Do you think this podcast might be about trip? Now remember, no wrong answers, my friends. We're just trying to recall by what we heard. And we don't have to understand everything right now. Just recall what you heard. Good job, Julio. You're right. What's up, Maria? Yeah, Maria, you're right. It's really hard to remember everything, isn't it? Why do you think that's hard, Maria? Why do you think it's hard to remember everything I just read? Exactly. The information came at you fast. The information came at you in a full pace. It was a lot of information, correct? So sometimes when we have a lot of information coming at us, what do you think we can do during that situation? Now, I've told you a few times what I've done when I was in Panama learning Spanish. What can we do when a lot of information comes at us? Good. Right, Maria. You can take some notes down. We're going to be doing that on the next reading. One, Well, you could ask the speaker to pause, and in certain circumstances you could do that, maybe if you're in a friend or something really informal, but like in a teacher setting or in a professional conversation, we might not want to ask them to pause. What's the last one there, Julio? What do you think we could do if we don't understand? Yeah, if you have a friend there, you could turn to a friend and say, hey, what do you think they're talking about? When I was in Panama, I often went to a friend whose Spanish I really understood, and I said, ¿Qué estás haciendo? What are they saying? I don't understand. And they would explain to me in very, very simple Spanish, so I would understand. Another thing we can do, friends, is actually chunk that information. So let's say we have to listen to something for class. We chunk it. What do you think chunking means? Julio? Good. It's like bites, right? Little bites, things that we can do in little bits. So now we're going to practice that. So we're going to chunk. And what chunking means, my friends, is I'm going to read just that first paragraph. It's 4 sentences. I'm going to pause. I'm going to speak slower. And you're going to flip your papers over where your guided notes are. And you're going to try to find the vocabulary that goes in the line, right? These are guided notes. So that entire podcast is written out, but some words are missing. If you look at your papers, those words are at the top. Those are our vocabulary words that we talked about at the beginning of class, right? They're right there at the top. So I'm going to speak slow. I'm going to chunk for you. Now, we just went from top up on that podcast. I just read it. I just asked you to listen. And now we're going to go from like the bottom up. We're going to go slower. We're going to chunk the information. We're going to pause and we're going to discuss. Okay, are we ready? Let's go. Welcome to our travel podcast. Today, we are talking about Bali, a beautiful island in Indonesia. Many tourists visit Bali because it has amazing beaches, interesting culture, and friendly people. Okay, I'm going to read it again. It's okay if you're not done. Take a minute, finish those up. I'm going to go through it another pass. We're going to listen to it again. Okay, we're ready. Great. Welcome to our travel podcast. Today, we are talking about Bali, a beautiful island in Indonesia. Many tourists visit Bali because it has amazing beaches, interesting culture, and friendly people. Great. All right, take a minute. Did you see a difference? So the first time I was a little faster in how I read it. The second time I was slower, but we're chunking the information. Who found it easier to follow along with me as I was reading? First off, you have the words in front of you, which make it a little easier. Number 2, you have that vocabulary. And number 3, I'm speaking really slow. Okay, so Juan, it's good to see you in class today. Yes. You were able to follow the second time I read easier? Good. Why do we think it was easier for Juan to understand the second time I spoke? Julio? Yeah, I spoke slower. That's true. I chunked and I enunciated differently. But who thinks having the information in front of them made it easier? Yeah, it does. But when we're out in the world, we don't have that information in front of us often. And sometimes the information comes at us fast. And sometimes we just have to remember our skills of listening, taking notes if we can do that, asking a friend or somebody who was there, or maybe even going back to that individual that was speaking later and say, hey, could you explain that again? Good job. All right, my friends. Remember, we are going bottom up right now, which means we are really reading and listening closely. All right, now just listen, and then the second through, I want you to put your vocabulary down. The capital city of Bali is in Denpasar. It is a